Has anyone ever been to a wedding where someone actually objected? And if so, how did that go? Story 1, kind of. My uncle was getting married. Small, just a handful of family and a minister. I was videotaping. My grandmother was not into it at all. With each line spoken by the minister, she had a cutting, sarcastic response. I could not believe it. It was so unlike her. When that part came up, she said, "I object." But does it really matter? They are going to do it anyway. The minister just ignored her and proceeded. Business as usual. They were divorced within a year. Wish I had a copy. Story 2. I had a friend who was a minister, and the subject came up if he asked the question during ceremonies he officiated. He laughed and said no way. He basically tells the couple not to include it because it only invites a moment of anxiety at best, misery at worst. His best story, and one of the reasons he stopped including the question, was a couple where the lead up to the wedding, the couple was obviously in love. The bride-to-be was very smiley and happy. Day of the wedding, she's stone-faced. He knows something is up because he's never seen her like this, and he asks if she is okay. "I'm fine." Right before the service, he asks again. "I'm fine." He gets to the question. Does anyone object to this union? The bride reaches over, grabs the maid of honor, shoves her into the bride's spot, and says, "You're screwing him. You marry him," and then stormed out of the church. Story 3. A friend of mine has a band that plays lots of weddings and other parties. They were hired for a birthday party that turned out to be a surprise wedding. The guy surprised his GF with a proposal and wanted to have a wedding ceremony then and there. She said no and left. Story 4. My auntie's fiancé was already married. Lady stood up waving marriage cert, so wedding didn't go ahead. The reception was on a long boat, so we still went to that. The fiancé went back to home country to sort it out and never came back. Story 5. Not quite the question as asked, but too funny to not share. Priest. Any objections? Father of the bride. Underscore lets out the hardest, loudest, most complex-sounding sneeze I've ever heard in my life, completely with involuntarily saying, "Achoo!" Mother of the bride, hammered on champagne. "For sake, Jerry." It took a good 5 minutes for everyone to regain their composure. Story 6. I went to a wedding where the best man was replaced a week before because he banged the bride, but the wedding still went ahead just with a different best man. They are divorced now. Story 7. This was in America, and the wedding was in a Buddhist temple. Parents of the groom stood up and objected because they didn't believe the bride was of the same class. They spoke in another language, so most of the English-speaking guests didn't know they were objecting. My husband was the best man, and those closest to the couple knew this might happen. The Buddhist priest said he would handle it if the parents tried anything. After the parents spoke for a while, the priest said to the groom, "You've heard what your parents had to say. What do you want to do?" The groom replied, "I want to marry my bride." So the priest asked the parents to leave. At this point, the rest of the guests are cluing in that this was not a nice part of the ceremony, and that the parents were actually objecting. So as the parents walked out, some of the guests were berating them, saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself, and how could you do that?" And even though the groom was not happy with his parents, that was very hard for him to hear. That was 30 years ago. The couple is still married. They have 2 beautiful, successful children. After the groom's mom passed away, the groom's father came around and was involved in their lives until he died. Story 8. A woman in her 20s at the time objected to her mom marrying my uncle, so she started yelling, "Mom, don't marry him," during the ceremony. The ceremony proceeded, and some family on the mom's side lead the daughter away to quit interrupting. I don't blame her. My uncle was a lying lazy. The marriage didn't last. Story 9. One of my cousins is married to literally one of the kindest and coolest dudes I have ever met. Before the wedding, her little sister was saying how she's marrying my best friend. At the wedding, when the priest dude asks if anyone objects, the room is dead quiet and all you hear is a little girlish whisper, "I do." It was honestly really adorable and we all laughed, and my cousin's husband and her little sister are still best friends. Story 10. At his rehearsal dinner, a co-worker's mother toast included that his soon-to-be wife was a dirty who wasn't good enough for her son. Folks not happy. Video ended, so didn't see the whole thing. At wedding, which I attended, his mom started to say something at the "speak now" part, but was silenced by her daughter. Mom left and didn't see the rest of the ceremony. Everything about that poor guy was drama. Story 11. I don't know if it's a UK thing or even just a one specific church thing, but I was told by the priest in a rehearsal that if someone objects, even as a joke, the priest is required to pause the ceremony and talk to the objector alone to discuss their concerns and decide if they have a valid objection. Like, it's not a fun, jokey moment, it's a real legal part of the ceremony. He also said it used to be custom that if you raised an invalid objection, you then had to pay for the wedding. Story 12. Not a wedding, but at a funeral, someone objected the death. At my uncle's funeral, his ex-wife and a local church cult leader tried to raise him from the dead. We were all sitting there like normal people at a normal funeral, and she walks up to the casket and starts yelling, "James Lester, raise up!" I didn't know she was there, or I would have prepared myself for shenanigans. Also, I didn't know my uncle's middle name was Lester, so please imagine the confusion. So she and the cult leader are literally yelling at my uncle's body. Not surprisingly, my uncle refused to resurrect himself. They were escorted out. I've actually never told this story because it makes my family look insane. Story 13. Yes, at my cousin's, the bride's ex showed up, and when he stood up to object, my uncles grabbed him and bum-rushed him out of the church and gave him a tune-up in the parking lot. Catholic wedding, of course. Story 14. I went to a Catholic wedding where, when the priest asked this question, one of the groomsmen did a very loud, long throat clearing, which got everyone laughing. Everyone except for the bride's elderly Italian grandmother, who marched out of her seat and angrily hit the groomsman with her handbag and shouted at him in Italian. Story 15. My mother passed away about 15 years ago. 5 years later, my dad married my now stepmother. It was an outdoor wedding on a beautiful sunny day, and during the spot where they usually ask if anyone objects, a big gust of wind came out of nowhere and knocked over some tables. Afterward, multiple people came to tell me that wind gust was my mother objecting, which I like to believe was true. Story 16. A relative visited one ceremony where it was asked if anyone objects, and the groom decided it's a good time for a joke and said, "I do." The lady who was going to marry the couple just turned and left. They had to go through all the paperwork again and change the date. Got married, divorced in like 3 years if I remember correctly. Story 17. My grandmother objected at my sister's wedding. My sister was a Florida-based Italian Catholic and somewhat conservative individual who fell in love with a progressive New York Jew. My nonna said it wouldn't work, and it would change one of them, and she was worried about it changing her granddaughter. My parents managed to get her away from the wedding, and it continued. My sister is now neither Catholic or conservative, so my nonna was absolutely right. Story 18. I was the best man at my bestie's wedding. Smewan that we tolerated in our friend group objected and said he was in love with the bride and that he was the only one that could make her H-papy. She had been nice about his feelings until then and reminded him in front of the entire ceremony that A, he couldn't hold down a job because he had too big of an ego. B, didn't get along with her friends because they all had something they were working on. A book, a career, a trip, volunteer job. And he had nothing, so he constantly tried to downplay their accomplishments on purely presumptuous ideas. And C, his idea of was, blow me and I'll finger you. Night, hun. She was way more thorough and more cruel, and it was a hysterical 5-minute ordeal. I meant he had it coming or starting at her wedding. He got up and left. I was pretty sure he was crying as he walked away, but no one went after him. It was both brutal and hilarious. He was like the Jar Jar Binks of our friend group. You hated him, but he made you feel better because at least you weren't as bad as Peter. Story 19. The mom of one of the bridesmaids got up and yelled, "Yeah, I object. You fucking stole him from her," while pointing at the bride. I've known the groom for a long time, and by proxy the bride. I am still very good friends with them. I have never seen her more infuriated than at that moment. The bridesmaid got up from her chair and was like, "I'm so sorry. Let me get her out of here." The bridesmaid and the bride's stepfather escorted the woman out of the wedding, and it continued. Story 20. My mom told me she was going to pay an old boyfriend to stand up and object at my wedding. She didn't in the end, but I did cast a quick look around in the church before walking down the aisle. Story 21. My husband's first marriage. The brother of the bride stood up and said to my husband, "Say no, you can still be happy." They went through with the marriage, wound up divorcing with a messy breakup. Brother-in-law is still best friends with my husband. As far as he's concerned, he gained a brother and lost a sister and is better off for it. And he never lets him forget the fact that he was right, and he should have bailed LOL. Edited for clarification. Story 22. Oldie but a goodie. This happened back in the 70s. This was shared to Lee by the guy who married my parents. It went something like this. Does anyone object to this union? I do. That's my husband. So they paused the wedding. The bride, groom, and the woman objecting went into a small room. The woman who objected provided documentation showing the groom was still legally her husband. Apparently, the couple had started divorce proceedings sometime earlier, but never finished. The wedding was canceled and everyone sent home. Story 23. I was not at the wedding, but know of a case where there was an objection, and the circumstances were quite exceptional. When I was a detective with the Child Protection and Sexual Offenses Unit, we dealt with a case involving a 14-year-old girl who had been raped by a known adult male. The first disclosure of the rape was made by her at his wedding ceremony, which she attended uninvited. When the pastor asked if there were objections, she rose and said yes, she had an objection. The groom had raped her a week before. The pastor stopped proceedings and took the child to an adjacent office, where she repeated the allegation and gave more information. Shockingly, the bride was still willing to go through with the ceremony, which was concluded while the girl waited in the office. Afterwards, the pastor took her to the local police station, Belleville South in Cape Town, South Africa, where a case was opened and the matter assigned to my unit for investigation. We carried out the arrest at the V&A Waterfront, Cape Town the next evening, Sunday, where the groom and his friends were partying it up. The bride, of course, was left home alone, one day after the wedding. I was blown away by the courage it took for the girl to attend the wedding ceremony alone, surrounded by the friends and family of the perpetrator, and to make the disclosure to his face in the way she did. For those wondering how she knew so much about him and when he would be getting married, he lived in close proximity to the girl's family in Belleville South, and the two families knew each other. He had siblings who attended school with her. Story 24. I was at a small ceremony indoors, maybe 30 people tops listening. When the minister asked for any objections, a picture of the bride's dead grandmother that was hanging on the wall fell to the ground with a loud thump. We looked at each other, but the minister finished anyway. Divorced within a year. Story 25. This will sound absolutely stupid, but when I was a kid, my deeply religious aunt had her wedding at a local church. During the objecting part, lightning struck very near the church. I remember to this day how the following thunder was so loud that the fancy windows of the church started rattling. Well, the timing of the strike was very unfortunate for my uncle because my aunt took this as a sign of a god objecting to her marriage and called the wedding off on the spot. Needless to say, they married on the same day year later, and this time without objection from a god. They are still married to this day. Story 26. Not a wedding I attended, but my best friend went to her aunt's wedding. Aunt's future, toxic mill, whips out proof from ancestry that they're actually first cousins. Wedding was canceled, and the bridegroom haven't spoken since. Story 27. I was at one. Didn't know what happened as I was in the back. The bride runs out to the limo, her family after her. I said to the person next to me, "Cold feet?" She's like, "Oh no, I thought this might happen. Her ex is here." We went outside. He'd apparently come into a lot of money. He came to the side door front of the church, said he objected because he's rich and wants her back. She paused too long for the groom's liking. He said, "Fuck you both." She ran. Last I saw, they were at the limo with her. She was crying, have no idea how it ended, but there was no wedding. We went to the reception, no bridal party. We ate, drank, danced, and left. Story 28. My best friend, males, and I drew somewhat apart during college, then grew closer after college. He fell into a group of friends who were a little wilder than me. I don't blame him. College is supposed to be fun. I missed out. That's my fault because I did a 5-year program that got me my BA and MBA in short order. After school ended, he was asked by a new friend to be his best man. I knew the guy and his fiancée secondhand. He was a bit of an ogre and she was cute, a bit mousy. I wasn't at the wedding, but the big day comes and we all go about our lives. It was the 90s and I worked that Saturday. Yes, office space culture was real then. I go out to our watering hole that night and there was my best friend drinking a double whiskey and a disheveled tux. Good wedding? How was the reception, grub? I asked. No wedding, no reception. I ate dinner at Applebee's by myself. He said. The bride told the limo driver to take her for a few big laps. She eventually showed, gathered her family around her, and told the groom it was not happening today or ever. The physical and mental abuse was too much, and she was too far into a drug habit he pushed on her and was going to seek help. Now understand, only a few at the wedding knew any of the abuse or drug abuse was going on. The ogre went into a rage, tried to attack her, and got repelled by the better men and women in the crowd. She got her help and self-confidence back and married a great guy a few years later. 3 kids, almost 30 years together. Her would-be husband kept up his bad habits and ended up killing his girlfriend and himself in a drug-fueled murder-suicide in our 30s. Still shocks me to this day. My best friend has been pretty much straight and narrow since. It sobered him up in many ways. Story 29. Well, sort of. It was staged, prearranged, and the minister was warned ahead of time. The couple said they wanted to make the ceremony more interesting, so they had a friend object declaring his love for the bride in an over-the-top dramatic speech. The best man, my husband, stabbed the guy with a stage dagger. He played dead, and 2 of the other groomsmen dragged his limp body away. The wedding proceeded. I have to say, it was pretty awesome. The bride and groom are still happily married 30-plus years later. Story 30. I used to make wedding videos. Did one at an outdoor wedding spot high on one side of a valley. It had rained earlier in the day, but the storms had cleared and the wedding could continue. During the vows, I don't touch the camera, just step back and let it run. So I'm spaced out waiting for the vows to finish and notice a radio tower far across the valley. Suddenly lightning hits the radio tower. I had enough time to think, boy, when the thunder gets here, it'll probably loud. I also had enough time to clue in that the minister was saying, if anyone objects to this union, let him speak now or forever. Keblom! Total silence in the venue. Preacher takes a second to look around and make sure everybody is all right. On one has been smote. Well, that's never happened before. Afayek, they're still married. That was 10 years or more ago. Story 31. I perform weddings, but I do not give the option. I tell the bride and groom ahead of time that the guests have accepted the invitation to your wedding to bless it. If they have a problem with your decision, they need to tell you long before that day. I didn't really think people gave that option outside of Hollywood. It just invites trouble. I take a similar approach for funerals. While I let families give as many eulogies as they want to for their deceased loved one, they must approve each speaker ahead of time. I do not pass the mic. I don't want some estranged lover or drunk uncle getting up and making a fool of the family or the deceased person. So far, so good. Story 32. Not exactly an objection, but the wedding was on a boat. No one could leave. And the groom was Jewish and marrying a Mexican Catholic woman. The groom neglected to tell his family it was a full Catholic wedding, and the groom's family stood up and pitched a fit when they realized the groom was going to take communion. The uncle who sponsored his bar mitzvah stood up and announced that the groom was a disgrace to the family and walked downstairs. The reception was a shit show. Story 33 haven't been to personally, but my mom said that her soon-to-be Emile stood up when the priest said, "Speak now or forever hold your peace." Upon being told that, I never let it go. My mom worked her off and got all her 6 kids into college. Screw that old lady. Some people just can't appreciate others. To this day, she doesn't like my mom, but TBH, their whole family never deserved my mom to begin with. Can anyone relate? Story 34. Attended a wedding where the minister said something along the lines of, "If anyone here objects to this marriage, you can keep your mouth shut. Today is not about you." Story 35. I have a really weird family. Half of my family, my dad's side, are East Coast wasps. We're talking tweed jackets, prep schools, taking a brandy in the study, riding lessons, the whole kit and caboodle. The other half of my family, my mom's side, are East Texas hillbillies. I have an uncle who's gotten a DUI while riding a four-wheeler in * 2 separate incidents. * I have a cousin who is currently in prison because he tried to rob the tropical fish store where he worked. They arrested him when he tried to come in for his next shift. I went to a wedding of a cousin of mine from the hillbilly side once. First off, I never knew the whole, "Does anyone object to this union?" Thing was real. I thought that was they only do on TV. Anyways, when the preacher asked that, the bride's mother made some noise and then excused herself, leaving the ceremony. She didn't say yes or anything, but she definitely made some weird noise at a super inopportune time, and then stood up and walked out. My aunt, the groom's mom, took that as a sign of disrespect and left to confront her. Yes, you heard that right. In the middle of her son's wedding vows she decided to leave to go confront the bride's mother for making a noise. I'm not proud of these people. The ceremony ends and the bride and groom are being ushered out of the church and into a limo to take them to their reception. And out in the parking lot, my aunt and the bride's mother are locked up like 2 wrestlers. Then I hear someone shout, "Oh, come on! Y'all just quit it!" And I turn around to see my uncle and the bride's father are now fighting in the foyer of the church and the fucking preacher is trying to break them up. To the surprise of abso-fucking-lutely no one, that marriage lasted 2 whole years. Story 36. I wasn't there, so this is a secondhand story and took place shortly after the wedding, but at the reception, no one could find the groom until they found him out in the limo having with one of the bridesmaids. The bride went back into the reception, stopped the band, took the microphone and told everyone there what just happened, naming the bridesmaid, and said the wedding would be annulled and all gifts would be returned. She totally took charge of the situation, but... Story 37. I wanted to pay a local actor to burst into my wedding, shout, "I object, I love the bride," and then we each pull swords and sword fight up and down the aisle. In the end, I would win and the ceremony would wrap up as planned. My wife did not think this idea was awesome, so we just had a regular wedding instead. Story 38. My mill is a very emotionally and physically abusive person, and really worked over my wife throughout the years. She didn't make a stink at the wedding, but she made sure that anyone near her, including my parents and myself, knew just how much she didn't like me and that she would make sure it didn't last. Tangentially, she nearly got her wish. But despite all of that mess, my wife and I are still married and my wife is now low contact with her mom. Story 39. I used to work for a very high-end wedding place and worked hundreds of weddings and never got to witness a total disaster. Sex in the coat room was about the best it got, but the word objection wasn't in play in this situation. Story 40 was Mo H to BFF. One of the groomsmen thought it would be funny to raise an objection. He did not understand that by law, all proceedings had to be stopped and investigated, meaning the officiant had to take him aside to question him. He had the audacity to keep the joke going until the officiant said that he would not continue and the wedding would be called off. Both sets of parents and multiple guests also had to be questioned to confirm the objection was uncalled for. It took over an hour. The wedding scheduled after was set back 30 minutes. Their guests started arriving while all this was going on. It was a huge mess. Dude thought it was hilarious. I clocked him with my fancy dyed special for the day's shoe the minute the shortened photo shoot was over. He was asked to not attend the reception. Bride and groom feared for his safety after I whacked him. They dropped him as a friend immediately. They will celebrate their 30th anniversary this June. Also note, this situation began the new tradition in my family of using Quaker self-uniting, available in Pennsylvania, marriage licenses, and having a loved one officiate at the ceremony. It basically means that the couple is married the moment they and their witnesses sign and mail their license to the municipality. They are already married when the ceremony takes place. The question of an objection is not a part of the ceremony. Edit. Changed a word for clarity. Story 41. My buddy wasn't fully rejected at the altar, which sounds weird, but I'll explain. Without too much back-in-the-day talk, I'll just say the groom is a good friend of mine I'd known since middle school, 7th grade. He'd met this awesome gal and they were slated to be married in our then early 30s. Come the wedding day, and it's almost a high school reunion of sorts. We attended a smallish private school. Everyone's stoked to see our grade school pal get married. We're all seated outside waiting for the bride to come out, and a reasonable amount of time goes by. People are just carrying on, catching up, etc. I've got a flask and sharing it with people. The groom goes inside to see what's up. More time goes on, then some more, then my flask is empty, and I want to go reload at the car but think better of it. Then the groom comes back out to address everyone and lets us know that this isn't happening today. The bride doesn't want to go through with it. We're still together and everything but now isn't the time. Then goes on to encourage everyone to eat the food. It's already paid for, etc. Here we are about 5 years later and they're still together but not married. No harm, no foul, I guess. Story 42. When my sister got married, they had the pastor skip over that part. I think she knew none of us could stand him. I don't think anyone would have spoken up to object, but the unity candle would not light. So in a way, I feel like that was God's way of objecting. Or just irony at its best. Divorced about 8 years later after the abusive cheating was found out. So glad he is gone. Story 43. I used to work at a fancy stately home as a waitress. Most of my shifts were weddings. This guy's objection was a bit untimely, but what happened after was even better. So the actual wedding happened at a church nearby, and they had the reception with us. This guy rocks up after the actual ceremony to declare his undying love for the bride and told the groom and the entire wedding party that he'd been sleeping with the bride. Cue tears and drama, blah blah blah. He's obviously chucked out of the wedding. Turns out he'd gotten an invite for the evening only and thought he was coming to object at the actual ceremony. The groom forgave the bride. He was a total wet lettuce. And they're both crying and hugging outside. The party carried on, and all was great, until someone overheard the chief bridesmaid talking to her friend about the fact she had also been sleeping with the bride. This prompted grandmother of the groom, about 75 years old, to punch the bride in the face. Groom apparently forgave the bride again as they went home together. I'm guessing he knew she was a bag, so wasn't really that surprised. As I'm here, I'll give you another one. Same place, literally weeks after the first wedding. We have a wedding where the groom's family are clearly loaded and full of their own self-importance. Especially the groom's mother, who gave us in the preparations. Nothing was good enough. Kept changing how she wanted things, talking to us like scum, and making it very clear her family are a better class of people than the bride's family, who were pretty nice and down to earth. Anyway, halfway through the evening someone's handbag goes missing. The groom's mother stormed into the kitchen, demanding that the manager search all our bags and saying she was calling the police on us thieving scumbags. Manager tells her, more politely than I would have, to calm down and not make assumptions. He has the security search the place. They go into the men's toilets and can see a guy stood in the stall with his back against the door. I guess they could see his feet. He refuses to come out initially, but eventually he does. He had 2 women's handbags in there that he'd been wanking into. He was also off his head on coke. The guy was the groom's brother. Son of lady who accused us all of stealing. Her face when she found out was amazing and she picked up her stuff and left straight away. Police came and the guy was arrested. Story 44. Heard that my father's girlfriend objected to him marrying my stepmonster, but was obviously okay with it after the honeymoon, because they kept dating for years. I was only 2 at that time. Heard this story years later, the night her and my mother reconnected at parent-teacher night. My mother being the parent and her being my sister's English teacher? Story 45. The wedding was at the bride's house. They had thought out almost every detail, except one. When the officiant got to the speak now or forever hold your peace part, the cuckoo clock expressed his opinion. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It was a full 15 minutes before the ceremony could continue without everyone busting out laughing. Story 46. Happily married man here. No objections at my wedding, which one had surprised me considering how much of a twaffle my wife's stepmom is. But on the other hand, if she had opened her mouth, at least half a dozen of my female relatives, including my sister, would have dragged her out of the church and beat her on the sidewalk. Story 47. No. But I should have been the one to object my father's last wedding with his now wife. She's physically abusive to him, and used to be to me, and at the time of their wedding I was around 15 years old. My dad's whole family was there. None of her family showed up because according to them they weren't invited, but they most definitely were because I handed them the invitations. Her dad is a hebephilic Vietnam vet, and his wife is a delusional psychopath. I would go into detail, but I'd rather not talk about it. Story 48. Maybe slightly different, but my BIL, married to my wife's little sister, is well known to be a very funny and fun prankster. He hired an 50-year-old female actor to object and cause a scene as if she was in love with him. She'll never love you like I do. I told you this was never going to work out, you have to leave. Only he, my Sil, Edit, the bride, and two uncles were in on it. One was Justice of the Peace doing the ceremony. It was a complete success that had people absolutely rolling in the aisles. Story 49. Not exactly an objection, but kind of is. My brother and sister-in-law were exchanging their vowels. My brother said, "I love you," to which their son yelled out, "You don't love her." Very cute, and everyone had a good laugh. Story 50. Just wondering, what happens if someone objects and give a valid reason other than cheating? Like, is there a protocol that needs to be followed, or it's up for bride and groom to decide? Story 51. I used to work at a banquet hall. Had some interesting nights. Best was the bride and the best man in the ladies' room, doggy style. That killed the evening. Story 52. I was at a wedding 3 years ago as guest on the bride's side. A guy thag I hadn't met before stood up and called the bride out to leave with him. She looked so shocked, but she left with the guy. Turns out they had broken up long before she met the groom, and he picked her wedding day to reappear in her life. They must be happy. They're still together today. Story 53. My father-in-law didn't really object, but when the master of ceremonies asked, during the wedding of his friend, if someone wanted to object, he said, "Well, I don't want to object, but I sure hope this is the last time." Everybody laughed, but the bride was pissed, of course. His friend was a notorious womanizer. Story 54. Not at the exact moment when the question, "Does anyone object?" is typically asked, but still, I was the best man for my wife's brother, which was odd and a whole different story, when he married his wife. They're good people. However, extremely misguided and insanely disrespectful of everyone else's time. To provide an example of this, they were late to their own 300-plus guest wedding at a very lavish venue, which shocked none of the immediate family, but still. Anyway, we're about 20 mins into the outdoor ceremony, on a very beautiful summer day, when a car slowly drives past. The passenger of the car rolls down his window and screams, "Don't fucking do it!" prompting laughter from the majority of the 300-plus in attendance, myself included. A normal couple would have taken this in stride, had a quick laugh, and then moved on. Did my brother-in-law and his wife? Nope. They both cried and claimed that their fairy tale day was ruined. The rest of the night was fairly uneventful, save for some cringy moments. The bridal party stayed on site at the venue, but was informed that another wedding was taking place the next day, and that we needed to check out by 11 a.m., not unreasonable at all. What time did my brother-in-law and his wife wake up? 12 p.m. Story 55. The groom objected. He sent his best man with a note and a photo. Text between the bride and a different groomsman and the affair they were having. I thought it was a stunt or TV. Crazy. 'Twas real. Story 56. A random dude snuck into the wedding and objected. He didn't say anything else and sat back down. The security guard just told him to leave and he just left. Story 57 was at a wedding when I was 19. Full-blown Victorian-style everything. I was a bridesmaid. And the minister said, "Does anyone object to this union?" The bride's father stands up and gets the "yes, I" out before the bride's mother whacks him with her walking stick and says, "Seamus, you sit your fat down before we have a wedding and a funeral." 400 people went from dead silent to trying to muffle their laughter while the bride is glaring at her dad. After the ceremony, the parents of the bride, who were very Scottish, were standing off to the side, and I overheard her mom, who was all of 5 feet tall, threatening her very large father. Dude was easily 6'6" and cowering as his wife went off on him about how that was not funny, and if he Jad ruined her baby girl's big day, she would have sent him back to his own mother in a box. Story 58, wait for it. My dad said, "What about the objection part?" At my sister's wedding. Celebrant said, "We don't ask that anymore." She ran off and married this fuckwit, so dad sort of had a point. Story 59. It didn't happen at that, but it happened on the wedding day. I was going to my aunt's 4th wedding, and pretty much was only there for the free food. It was before the ceremony was about to begin. Me and my brother overheard my uncle, who has never gotten along with my aunt, talking to the groom and basically told him, "You're better off running, lad. Her past 3 marriages have all ended up dead, all due to car crashes." Bit odd that, don't you think? The groom thought this was indeed odd, and decided to ask myself and my brother, 2 of our cousins and our other aunt, if what my uncle said was true. We told him it was, and thought the bride would have told him beforehand. Turns out she never disclosed the fact she had been previously married before. So the groom, for all intents and purposes, fled the church. Safe to say it was a dramatic day after that.